Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are 4 minutes past 1 p.m. So I suggest that we start. I'm your moderator this afternoon. My name is Wester. I'm working for CoLead, and I'm very pleased to host this session together with my colleague from the Fair Miles Consortium. As CoLead, we are a non-profit private sector association representing global fresh produce operators, and we are very pleased that we are also hosting the Fair Miles Consortium under our umbrella since end of last year, and hence also very pleased to be here and present the just transition principles for all of you. These principles have been developed in a process that took, let's say, almost 2 years before we came to this point. They are designed to support a smooth transition towards sustainable food systems in an approach that limits unintended negative consequences for vulnerable communities and suppliers and leaves no one behind. It has been an interesting journey together with various fresh produce stakeholders, and we were very pleased actually to launch these first draft principles in Berlin at Food Logistica in February 2026. And now this webinar is part of the consultation process to further refine, comment on these principles to allow us to proceed to the next steps. So the webinar here, the main purpose is to explain you the background of the Fair Miles Consortium, how we came about these principles, and what is a consultation process and what are the next steps. I'm pleased to be joined here by several colleagues of the Fair Miles group. I think on the next slide we will briefly show you the agenda. I'll give a brief introduction to our colleague presenters. So first we will have Dr. Ebenezer Larriea on board, who is Associate Professor in Sustainable Development Law at Aston University, who will provide some background and introduction to Fair Miles. Simon Derrick, Head of Sustainability at Fair Miles, will dive into the Just Transition Principles, and Christoph Walter will then take over, a sustainability consultant will take over to provide more information on the consultation process. And of course, we will end up with the implementation and next steps also covered by Simon. And finally, we'll have a Q&A and discussion. As mentioned before, you can put all your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. We'll be more than happy to respond to them at the end of the session. Note also that this session is being recorded. It will be put online at the Fair Miles page to also provide the visibility and explanation to those interested stakeholders who are not able to join us today. We'll keep the session straightforward and to the point. We'll aim to have it in time frame of around 45 minutes, but feel free also, of course, to add your questions and engage with us during this webinar. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Ebenezer for the introduction on Fair Miles.
Yes, thank you so much, Wester, and hello to everyone. Grateful to you for joining us. I'll be delivering a very brief introduction to the Fair Miles initiative, and I'll be relying on Simon to help me move the slides along. So if you can go to the first slide, please. So Fair Miles has been around for a while, and it's an initiative that in the past, as it is today, has arisen in reaction to previous movements in terms of sustainability initiatives that have been initiated in order to address urgent challenges emanating from our changing climate. And of course, those measures are right, but very much as was the case in the past, as it is now, there is always a bit of a risk with the way we implement sustainability, that there are some unforeseen circumstances that can result through the manner in which we seek to drive the net zero, or the manner in which we seek to drive our decarbonization and low carbon transition agendas. And so in 2007, of course, there was the food miles movement. And of course, Fair Miles at that time was initiated to respond to that, not necessarily to criticize the food miles movement, not at all, but rather to ask the very important question of whether we were adopting a balanced enough approach to the objectives behind the food miles movement. And that's what Fair Miles seeks to do today, because the wider question that we should be asking ourselves is not simply whether we should go hard and fast when it comes to sustainability, but whether we're doing so in a balanced enough way, in a manner which recognizes the environmental goals, but also acknowledges the developmental realities and the impact on livelihoods, and the fair access to markets for all people at the same time. And of course, in today's day and age, it's not food miles anymore, but it's more to do with net zero. And of course, this particular same issue of getting the right balance has arisen most in relation to air freight. So air freight is just but an example of how we see this particular struggle for balance emerge. And so as we go through the remainder of this webinar, you see air freight used or highlighted a lot, just to say that it's just an example for that particular purpose. Next slide, please. So we are a growing movement, and this is one of the main strong points when it comes to to Fair Miles, because Fair Miles is an initiative that has brought together different voices that do not always sit in the same room. So we've got voices from business, academia, developmental actors, supply chain stakeholders, as you can see the slide capturing very clearly. So our steering committee members are from Aston, we've got the ODI, we've got co-lead, of course, Union Flares, Blue Skies, and Beanstalk Global. And then we've got a growing number of consortium members. And of course, that matters, because if sustainability decisions are being made only by a select few, then of course that has its own effects. The idea is for Fair Miles to be collaborative, and that means expanding the net, bringing in a diverse set of voices to help to comprehensively address the kind of need for balance in our approach to sustainability that we want to achieve. Next slide, please. So the objectives of Fair Miles are very straightforward, but they're also powerful, because they are the sort of objectives that help us to pursue influence and to help us to achieve our ultimate goal, which is a fair approach to sustainability. So of course, our first objective is research, right? We want to be able to generate the evidence which helps to address misconceptions, helps to close gaps in knowledge. This is essential because one of the biggest risks in sustainability and the way we sort of implement the sustainability agenda is that we act on assumptions rather than on data-driven analysis. And of course, there is a huge issue when it comes to data gaps in sustainability implementation generally. And so obviously we want to be able to work on research. The second objective is advocacy. We want to be able to communicate very clearly the findings that we have to influence the right audiences. And we want to be able to translate the evidence that we're collecting through our research into a compelling public and policy narrative, which informs decision-making within various organizations of relevance, but also informs public discourse as well. And then finally is the policy engagement. We want to work with buyers and policymakers to ensure that fairness in the way that sustainability approach is embedded into sustainability policy and also into procurement policy. And we feel that this is where our project is especially important because the real test is not whether we can produce sustainability policy or sustainability report, etc., within organizations, but the real test is whether that evidence shapes and changes our approach and pushes us much further towards a fair approach to sustainability for all people. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in terms of our research, there are a number of things that we have done on that side. So we've for example, looked at the climate justice implications of banning air-freighted fresh produce. That was done through a research paper that is available online, where we looked at some of the climate justice risks and the unintended climate justice outcomes that can result from interventions such as air freight bans, which are designed to pursue the sustainability agenda and the net zero agenda. In addition to that, we've done much broader research to try and understand, again, looking at air freight as an example, the kind of livelihoods that air freight of perishables supports in terms of jobs, etc. And as you can see on the screen, some of our findings have been quite concrete. So, for example, 1.245 million agricultural jobs supported through businesses that rely on air freight to transport perishables, supporting 80 million livelihoods and supporting 2.4 million indirect jobs. And so these are obviously important facts that help us to understand a little bit more about the livelihoods and some of the climate justice impacts related to air freighted fresh produce and the businesses that rely on it to be able to trade and to export. And that is important because it helps us to understand some of the unintended effects that some of our interventions might bring about, specifically related to implementing net zero policies and progressing the sustainability agenda generally. Next slide, please. Through this research, we've obviously developed other key arguments still within the context of air freight as an example. So, for example, we've looked at the extent to which air freight contributes to global emissions, which is minimum. We've also looked at the carbon footprint from production in the global south, which again is lower than in other parts of the globe, and that's important because when you look across the board, the global south countries are much more adversely impacted by interventions to pursue sustainability initiatives such as net zero, decarbonization, etc., much more so than countries are affected by those measures in the global north. We've also looked at how the vast majority of businesses which rely on air freight to trade fresh agricultural produce actually use passenger flights, which means that those planes would be flying regardless. And that is important because it helps us to better understand what the true impact is. And of course, we've also looked at the unequal scrutiny when it comes to modes of transporting fresh agricultural produce, where some sectors are more scrutinized than others. And we've done this obviously looking at air freight as an example, but obviously these key arguments are not just limited to air freight, they're limited to other areas as well. And I think this slide talks about that, very well. So there are lots of stories out there currently which highlight other areas where there may be sort of significant sustainability considerations, and there are interventions that are being thought about, or interventions that are being sort of carried out at the moment. Point of view, where we feel that a lot more thought needs to be given to how balanced these interventions are in order to ensure that the outcomes are fair from a climate justice point of view. Next slide, please. So where do we want to go with all this? Ultimately, we want to end up in a situation where we have the confidence that sustainability policies and actions are informed, that they are balanced, and they are fair. This means avoiding blanket bans and assumptions which are not driven by data, and the way that we implement sustainability initiatives. It means also recognizing that good sustainability policy must be capable of handling complexity and must be capable of taking into account, right, the social dynamics that comes with the implementation of such policies. The policies must reduce emissions, yes, but it must also avoid undermining the livelihoods of the marginalized communities and some of the poorest communities across the globe, particularly where those communities have contributed the least to the climate crisis. And I think this is exactly how Fair Miles is situated. That describes exactly our mission, right? To have a meaningful environmental improvement alongside the protection of market access, incomes, and development opportunities for vulnerable producers. And so I hope you enjoyed the rest of the webinar, and I thank you very much for being with us once again. I'll pass back over to Weston.
Thank you very much, Ebenezer, for that introduction. And I'll pass on the baton directly to Simon.
Thank you very much, Wester. And thank you very much, Ebenezer, for introducing Fair Miles, and thank you to everyone for joining this webinar and for your interest in what we're doing and the principles that we're proposing. So I'm just going to take you through the principles. I'm going to keep it very high level, but I want to give you an overview of what they are before we talk about how the consultation is going to work, because it's important that we get your views on them to see if there's anything that we've missed at all. So what I'm going to present now obviously isn't the final version of the principles, but it's if you like, kind of the first version that we're opening up to wider consultation. So if you go to the Fair Miles website, fairmiles.org /principles, we'll provide a link for you to go to the website a bit later. If you've not seen it already, you can download more details that provides a bit more of an explanation for each of the principles, and you'll also see a survey which you can complete, which Christoph's going to give a bit of an overview to in a moment. But what are those principles? So over the past few months, actually going back almost 2 years since when we started this journey, we've engaged with very many organizations, whether it be NGOs, whether it be fresh produce companies, retailers, representatives on a government level. We've tried to understand what it is that we can do to I guess address the issues that Ebenezer has highlighted, whereby we want to ensure that we're not embarking on sustainability measures that end up doing more harm than good. So how do we avoid that? It's all very well us explaining that there's a challenge, that we need to avoid these situations, but what can we do to help? And I think that's one of the things that has come out of the various different engagements that we've had, whether it be the surveys that we've done or the bilateral meetings or the various different workshops that we've held, is that there is a need for guidance. Guidance to help us avoid making those decisions that have those unintended consequences or do more harm than good. So how can we do that? And one of the things that we have decided to do is to develop these very high level principles to firstly understand on as I said, a very high level, what are those principles to help us and guide us make the right informed decisions. The intention is to build this out, to provide more detail over time, to provide case studies and tools for us to use these principles and to apply them appropriately. But the first step, if you like, is to understand or decide what those principles actually are. So, over the past few months, we've developed several versions. They've gone from 3 to 10 to 6 and now down to 5 principles, and we kind of feel that where we are now of these principles allows us to encompass all the various different considerations, all the different ideas and thoughts that have been suggested so far, but we may have missed something, and this is where actually it's important to get your perspective. So let me just go through them one by one now very quickly. Principle 1 is primarily, as you see on the screen, about risk and resilience. And this is response to a lot of the feedback that we've got around actually ensuring that decisions that we take don't end up causing us issues with regards to security of supply, food security, etc., etc. So this is about actually, supply chains. This is about businesses, ensuring that, we're taking decisions now with the right intentions that don't end up causing us problems in the future, which puts our supply chains and businesses into jeopardy and which can end up having significant impacts. So it's about business risk and resilience. Is the decision that I'm taking, is it feasible? Is it the right one? Is it going to help us achieve our business objectives? But alongside that, we've also got Principle 2, which is impact on people. And actually, some of the feedback that we've got so far is that it's not just about impact on people, it's about impact on people, about different stakeholders, about the environment as well. So you could actually relate Principle 1 and Principle 2 to the whole concept of double materiality, risk, financial risks, and then impact that your organization has and the decision will have on society and to the environment. So Principle 2, who's going to be affected by this? What's going to be affected by this? Is it going to have an impact on livelihoods and jobs? Is it going to have negative impacts on the environment? It might be that the decisions that we take, a policy that we introduce, a new requirement that we introduce might actually be designed to have a certain environmental benefit, but in doing so, it might result in having other negative environmental benefits elsewhere. So understanding the impact is principle number 2. Principle 3 is about proportionality. So actually it relates to principles 1 and 2 because ultimately it asks the question, do the risks and impacts justify the intended benefit? So taking on board the risk and resilience, the impact on people, society, and the environment, is it worth it? Is what we're proposing justified? And then principle 4 is about data responsibility. So the information that we're using, the data that we're using to understand risk and resilience, to understand the impact on people, but also the data that we are using to understand the impact, the benefits behind what we're proposing to do in the first place. Is it right? Is it representative? Are there any data gaps? And how are we getting that data as well? Are we thinking about how we engage with the people that are going to be affected, the different parts of the supply chain that are involved to get that data? Are we reliant maybe only on secondary data sources? So enabling people to have a voice in the process in terms of gathering the information that enables us to make those decisions and to ultimately decide whether what we're going to do is proportional. And then the last principle is fair transition. So if at the end of it we've decided that yes, actually the risks and impacts do justify the intended benefit, and that the data we've used to make that decision, the information that we've used to make that decision is fair, is accurate, and has been obtained responsibly. If after all that, what we're proposing to do is justified, and we are going to go ahead and do it to ensure that actually there is a fair transition. And what do we mean by that? Ensuring that enough time is provided, that there's support provided, that there are alternatives where necessary, to ensure that what we're going to do minimizes those negative impacts. What are the potential impacts on livelihoods, and how do we mitigate those impacts if they're going to be negative? So I appreciate that these are very high level, but talking through these principles, it's probably open up more questions, and you may have thought of other things that we've not considered, and that's obviously where this consultation is important. We'd like to hear your reaction. We'd like to hear get your feedback and your impact, your feedback and your input to ensure that we get these absolutely right. One thing I would actually add as well, and that's one of the comments that's come up so far from after we've introduced these principles, is actually ensuring that we're really explicit about unintended consequences. Because it's quite easy for us, well, maybe it's not easy, but it's maybe tempting for us to think about all of those impacts that are within our kind of direct sphere of influence, and maybe not think about those which we might not have thought about. I'll give you an example, and it's one I've given a few times so far. Again, sort of looking at the air freight case study, when we're looking at what drives demand for air freight and what uses the capacity for air freight. One of the things that we didn't realize that has come to light quite recently through some research that's been done by Pharma Aero is actually the importance that air freight is in providing that capacity to get life-saving drugs, vaccines and medicines into countries in the global south, and they're making use of air freight capacity that exists in some respects because of fresh produce that's being exported from those countries. And there was some data to suggest that actually where we've seen a reduction in air freight, because actually there's more demand in parts of East Asia, where you see more fast fashion coming by air, that actually the reduced capacity in air freight has had a negative impact on accessibility and distribution of these these pharmaceuticals. So that's just an example, and that research is available as a white paper from Pharma Aero, but of course there'll be other impacts, and I think what we want to be really clear about is actually ensuring that somewhere within these principles that those unintended consequences that we might not have considered are taken into account. How can we encourage each other when we're looking at the policies that we introduce to actually look underneath the stones that we might not have thought of to look underneath? So that's an overview of the principles. As I said, we're really keen to get your views and to help us explain the process that we're going to go through to get your views. I'm going to hand over now to Christoph, who's going to take us through them. Christoph.
Thanks, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, the principles as you see them today are already the outcome of some consultation within the consortium. so they didn't fall from the blue sky, pardon the pun. They have been debated, and as Simon said, there's been a bit of a process which has been incredibly helpful, because what we want to ensure with this process so far, and the ongoing consultation, is that we produce something that is actually relevant for practitioners and people in real life, that has practical use, generates practical insights, and really helps people in positions where they make decisions about sourcing decisions that eventually affect people in the global south. Obviously, we want to put this on as broad a basis as possible in terms of the people we speak to. So we have a long list of organizations that we've reached out to, and this consultation is also semi-open or semi-public. And for now, we want to get the principles right, but then develop another layer of tools and documents underneath that help really contextualize these principles, and then also help with the subsequent decisions on how to best use them. So essentially, anyone who's in the industry or has a legitimate interest in this is invited to participate. So this is public on the Fair Minds website, as Simon has said before. And we'll come to that. The link is printed on the screen, and we also have a QR code which is available. So if you just open that link, you will find the principles and the survey for the consultation. Yeah, that's really trying to just open up to the industry and get as many relevant views as possible. We have another way of providing feedback. If you feel more comfortable or feel actually that you have more contributions and that warrant a personal conversation, we're also very happy to do one-on-ones. So if you feel you'd like rather talk to somebody than fill in a survey, please reach out. Simon, that would be the email address, the contact email address, right, on Fair Miles on the website, I believe.
Yes, that's right. So secretariat@fairmiles.org. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Okay. So that's another possibility. I think we're going to go through the survey in a minute, but maybe just to clarify the timelines, if we could have the next slide, please. So yeah, so we've got today's webinar. So the consultation officially launched a few weeks ago. We have this webinar for basically disseminating the information about the fact that it's going on a bit further and reach further participants. You're also very welcome to spread the word within your network. So if you want to share this on LinkedIn or social media, or in your personal circles, or personal professional circles, I should say, please do. The consultation is open until the end of the month, and then we'll go through a cycle of processing, consolidating all of the input. And then there will be a launch of the first version at the FruitNet Congress in Barcelona, which is on the 30th of June. And we would also like to engage with a retailer in a pilot where these principles will actually be tested, in anger, in real life, and applied to a real case. So if you are interested in participating in a piloting function, or if you know somebody who might be, that would be also of interest to us and very valuable. The idea is that these principles would be refined occasionally, depending on what the pilot brings to light. There might be an immediate follow-up after the pilot to update them in light with whatever the pilot taught us, or there might be an update at a later stage. So there would be a review process. I think Simon also nobody's alluded to the fact that we are trying to find anchor organizations, so finding partners who are vocal in the space of just transitions and or decarbonization, to see whether we can partner on using these principles so that they don't solely remain Fairmile's principles, but that they gain a wider recognition and a wider use through endorsement and active use by other organizations as well. With that said, Simon, do you want to quickly take us through the survey? Or I can, but we need to have that on the screen.
Can you see that, Christoph?
Yes, it's visible. Thank you.
Yep, great.
Yeah, it's fairly small, but it's basically asking your your demographics, or what organization do you represent, and then looking for a quick assessment of usefulness, and then asking a series about open-ended questions, which are not obligatory. So if you feel you don't want to contribute much text, you can actually skip those. And then asking about the wider governance context within your organization, who are the important stakeholders and decision makers. And then, yeah, we're sort of trying to find out a bit more about the depth of data and detail that can actually be contributed and can guide these decisions, because we have a bit of a dichotomy of, on one hand, trying to be as lean and as simple and as straightforward as possible. On the other hand, a lot of these decisions and impacts are quite complex, and therefore they can't be really taken without data. So we're trying to just find the sweet spot and the balance between simplicity and data intensity. Yeah, and then it's asking about basically the usual questions around being consulted and informed further, and your contact details if you wish to contribute them. So fairly straightforward, fairly open-end, and as I said, if you feel that either this is too much or too little, and you'd much rather have a personal conversation, please reach out and we'll arrange a one-on-one with you.
Thank you, Christoph. I think that was a very good introduction on the consultation process, and I think Simon will guide us through the implementation, how the principles could be used, and also the potential next steps. So feel free to get back into it, Simon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Wester. I won't share my screen, as I don't have any slides to show for this one, so I'll just talk through it. I think pretty much the process that Christoph outlined covers obviously sort of next steps that we're looking for after the consultation. Obviously your feedback will inform the next draft of these principles, which we are looking to pilot with a retailer and organizations that have real examples where we can put these to the test. Now we have actually already sort of informally through our own organizations and links already started looking to apply these principles when we're sort of thinking or talking about particular environmental or social policies that we might be looking to implement. So we've had them in the back of our minds, so already we're kind of asking those questions as we go through, but obviously we want to be partnering an organization who can give us some real insights and feedback in terms of how to apply these practically, including things like any sort of tools or frameworks that can help. So whether it's a some form of a BCG type of a matrix or some kind of tool that can be used during a workshop, if that's the best way that these can be implemented. Obviously the consultation is going to help us to understand what you feel is the best way to implement them, but we want to be providing those kinds of tools and putting them to the test as part of the pilot phase, which we'll be looking to introduce during the second half of the year. Once we've piloted the principles and we've built more detail around that, as I suggested earlier on, what we're looking to do is to put in case studies, provide tools, provide further information and considerations within each of those principles, so that it becomes clear and clearer how they can be applied. In addition, and it's something that Christoph alluded to, was around how we ensure the credibility of these principles is applied and that they're not abused. One thing that we don't want is for organizations to say, yes, we've applied them without really applying them properly. And it doesn't necessarily make any difference to the quality of the decisions that are being made, and actually we end up with decisions being made or measures being implemented which do more harm than good. But ultimately, because we haven't looked at we haven't, even though we might have said we have, properly looked at the data that we're using, or we have not properly looked at the impact. So how do we provide that level of assurance is something that we will look to build into these principles and the guidance that comes with it over time as well. Do we sort of expect organizations that have said that they have applied these principles to provide some degree of justification or be able to demonstrate it? Should we be providing some degree of verification? But as Christoph also mentioned, we want to ensure there's balance, that we're not ultimately introducing another standard or framework which is going to provide more burden. We need to apply the principles to the implementation of the principles themselves. So after the pilot, what we would be looking to do alongside introducing the more detailed guidance is, as Christoph said, working with an organization that can help us to deliver them. And it might be an organization such as, for instance, SBTI or ETI, where they've currently got a presence and they've currently got influence to ensure that actually where we are introducing new policies or measures, that through those existing standards, that the Fair Miles Just Transition principles, if we end up calling them that, are also incorporated. So we want it to be incorporated within existing standards, frameworks, and organizations. So that's what we're looking to do ultimately to help us to implement and deliver the Just Transition principles. Ultimately, we want these to be widely known, widely understood, easy to reference and think about when we're coming up with how we're going to become more sustainable. We want these to be, as I said, widely and universally applied as far as possible. So that's the vision, and your participation will help us to get there. So that's it, I think, from me. I'll head back to you, Wester, to see if there's any questions and bring the webinar to a close.